Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ambassador, and others for attending here today. Ms. Stewart, according to the Climate Change Performance Index that was released during COP29, Canada now ranks 62nd out of 67 countries in the environmental performance. Given that your mandate includes representing Canada internationally, do you take responsibility for this ranking?
Thank you very much for your question. One of the main reasons that is important for me to engage internationally is so that countries can respect where we're coming from. You know, unlike peer countries, Canada's emissions were on a steady upward climb before we introduced the 2016 Pan-Canadian Framework. And it's important to note what we've been doing to reduce those emissions. And so by talking about...
Ambassador, the question was pretty straightforward. Do you take any responsibility for the ranking? The Canada is now 62nd out of 67 countries. Just a yes or no. Do you take any responsibility?
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Oh, yes.
A little bit of respect and decorum for our nonpartisan officials would be appreciated.
Noted. Mr. Mazur?
Just a yes or no. Do you take any responsibility for this ranking?
I take responsibility for explaining what Canada is doing on climate change internationally.
Thank you. Ms. Stewart, according to Minister Guilbeault's department, your work includes, quote, advancing the Prime Minister's global pricing outreach, end quote. When you visit countries around the world, do you ever encourage them to implement a carbon tax on their own? Yes or no?
One of my responsibilities is to advance an initiative called the Global Carbon Pricing Challenge. And we now have 18 members, 18 countries that have signed up to this challenge, recognizing the value of carbon pricing as a policy tool to help reduce emissions. And just this past COP29, we welcomed 3 more members to the table, including Uruguay, Finland, and Nigeria.
Again, Ambassador, do you encourage countries to implement a carbon tax? Just a yes or no answer.
I am promoting something called the Global Carbon Pricing Challenge to illustrate the value of carbon pricing as one of the important tools that Canada is using to help reduce emissions. And I'm very pleased to see that more and more members have been joining this initiative at the leader level, including the EU, France, Uruguay, Finland, to also help advance carbon pricing.
Ambassador, can you explain? Point
of order, Mr. Chair.
Yes, point of order, Mr. Vancouverden.
I hope that we can encourage members to be kind and courteous to our witnesses who have taken time out of their busy schedules to be here and share their insights with us today.
I agree, and we'll keep in mind that the ambassador is not an elected political figure, so maybe that should be taken into account. Go ahead, Mr. Mazur.
So I guess where we're at with the conversation, I just asked, do you promote and encourage countries to implement a carbon tax? And I think you did refer to the carbon pricing, carbon tax. We know it as a carbon tax here in Canada. That is our system. So you do promote that.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Vancouverden.
As the member opposite knows, the Supreme Court has already said that our carbon pricing is not a tax. He knows that very well.
That's true, but it's not a point of order. It's a point of information or debate. Go ahead, Mr. Mason.
Actually, I believe I was just asking Ms. Stewart to confirm that she does promote the carbon tax to other countries.
I would say there is a genuine interest internationally in the Global Carbon Pricing Challenge. And there are now 18 members that have signed up because they see carbon pricing as a valuable policy tool to reduce emissions.
I have another question here for you. According to reports, you charged Canadian taxpayers $254,000 in travel expenses in less than 2 years on the job. During your travel, did you ever promote or discuss Canada's carbon tax? Yes or no?
So I was appointed climate change ambassador for Canada to engage internationally. And I do take my
do what,
responsibilities
Ambassador?
very
Do what?
seriously when
What
it
did you do?
comes to traveling. I am
Point
there.
of order, Mr.
Excuse me,
Chair.
Mr. Mazer, I think we need to give Ms. Stewart a chance to respond, but I don't see why this is personally on either side, why this is so complicated. I mean, the ambassador's role is to promote our approach to fighting climate change, and that would probably, I would imagine, the ambassador promotes all the policies that we have, including capping methane emissions. But I don't know, is it? Were you still answering, Ms. Stewart, or?
That's right, Mr. Chair. I promote all of the policies that Canada is implementing and all of the incentives that we've been promoting in order to help address climate change.
All of the policies, including the carbon tax. Thank you. When was the last time you traveled to Canada in your role as Canada's climate change ambassador?
I was in Canada in September.
Where is your main office located?
I am based in Switzerland.
Media reports you were in Paris and London for, quote, carbon pricing outreach. During those trips, you charged Canadian taxpayers over $400 a night in hotels. What is carbon pricing outreach?
As I mentioned, my role as climate ambassador is to talk about what Canada does to address climate change, including promoting the Global Carbon Pricing Challenge. And to give some assurance to this committee of the seriousness I take of travel, I would like to turn to our CFO, who is at the table, our Chief Financial Officer,
that's okay. I
who
have
can
one more
talk
question for
about
you, actually.
the rigor I go through in order to determine my travel.
Okay, well, we're going to have to stop there because the 6 minutes is up. Mr. Van Couverden.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much to our ambassador for being here today. I apologize for what you've already had to endure, and I hope that the conduct of members on this committee can have a little bit more decorum when addressing you. The work that you do is important and valuable, and I, for one, thank you for what you're doing to address climate change on the global scale. You know, we'll hear often that climate change is something that Canada can't.
We're a little short of time. Monsieur Deltel, pour 4 minutes.
4 minutes, Mr. Deltel. Thank you, Chair, and good morning. And good morning especially to the Ambassador. You're appearing before this standing committee virtually, and that's a very good thing. So why are you here as a virtual witness, whereas you've had 30 trips over the last 2 years with a very high environmental price?
Thank you for your question. I am based in Switzerland. My spouse is posted here from Global Affairs Canada, and I'm here as an accompanying spouse. And so I didn't feel it was necessary to pay the cost to fly to Canada for this committee appearance. And I do take lots of virtual meetings in the course of my role as well.
Oui, d'accord, mais le problème, c'est parce que vous avez visité.
Yes, fine, but you have visited 5 continents, you have travelled everywhere, and your environmental footprint is a very heavy one. Whereas here, it's fine that you are appearing virtually. I prefer that rather than going across the Atlantic twice to speak about the environment. But why have you not had more virtual meetings rather than having 30 trips that have cost taxpayers over $250 million?
Thank you for your question. I do take many virtual meetings as well as engage in person. As Canada's climate ambassador, I have been asked to represent Canada internationally, and so that is why I travel as part of my role. And I do take that responsibility very seriously. And that's why I would like to turn to the Chief Financial Officer who is in the room, who can speak to the rules and the directives that I follow in my role.
Vous dites que vous parlez ça très personnel.
You said that you take that very personally. That's very good. Congratulations. But what has been the environmental bill that you've had to pay? We've talked about 250,000, as we saw in the National Post. What is your environmental bill when you have travelled to over 30 countries and to 5 continents? And personally, what have you paid personally, environmentally, when you could have done it otherwise?
I would like to turn to our Chief Financial Officer to also speak to public servants and the offsets that are made for public travel of public servants, please.
Pouvez-vous m'expliquer pourquoi,
Could you explain why, when you were in Canada, you travelled from Toronto to Ottawa backwards and forwards by plane, but you could in fact have taken the train and shown your attachment to the environment?
Thank you for your question. When I am invited to be somewhere, I do look at all the options, and sometimes it makes more sense. It's faster air travel, as you know, than train. But certainly, I do take this responsibility very seriously.
oui, ok, alors,
A point of
alors,
order,
est-ce que vous
Mr.
avez,
Chair.
Yes, so
Point of order, yes.
I'm just wondering about the relevance of this line of questioning to the purported purpose that we have these officials here, rather than grilling them on their specific choices on transportation methods. I think we have some rather larger policy issues that we should be addressing. Don't you agree, Mr. Deltel?
alors, monsieur,
It's within the frame of the discussion because we're discussing emissions reductions, but I would agree that we're narrowing in on one, an important but nonetheless partial aspect of a very broad issue, if I can put it that way. But it's Mr. Deltel's time, so you've got a
un
minute
instant,
left.
Monsieur le Président, c'est sur une question de règlement. Je
I'm
préfère
sorry.
just a moment, this isn't a point of order.
commentaire à faire.
Yeah.
I've got another comment.
As a response to your point of, but it's not a point of order. Well, not
Well, it's
really.
it's on relevance.
You could call it a point of order, but
Point of order on
She was
relevance,
18
because
yeah, point of order on relevance.
we're
Mr.
talking about Government of Canada's 2030
No, I
target for
understand.
reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We're not talking about the
Budget?
ambassador's personal
I
travel
know,
schedule.
I understand that. It
We have
is,
about
it is
50
far from the core of the issue. But
Bon.
Mr. Deltel, would you like to respond to that?
Très bien. Alors, dans la lettre de mandat de
In the mandate letter from the ambassador, it said that Canada's environmental policies need to be put into practice. So taking the plane rather than train and having meetings abroad over the 5 continents when you can actually do it virtually, is that really the government policies of this Liberal government?
I would like to turn to the Chief Financial Officer to talk about public servants' travel. Thank you.
Merci.
Go ahead. Is it Ms. Drainville? Yeah.
Beaucoup pour la question.
Thank you for that question. Now, as you know, before undertaking travel, each official is very much encouraged to look at all of the possible means available, depending on why they have to travel, if it's appropriate to do it virtually, or if it's better to take the train or the plane, and who pays the environmental bill, who foots the bill. Is it the person who's travelling or the government? It's the government who pays the environmental bill. So then we wash our hands and say, OK, we're buying trees, and that means we can continue to have trips throughout the world. Of course, the government, the current government, has a way of doing things, buying credits and offsets. What's the total of the credits that Canadian taxpayers have bought? Now, Mr. Vancouver, for 4 minutes.
Actually, I think it's me, Chair. Please.
It's all the same to me.
Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ambassador, I'd like to start on the international shipping industry. Minister Guilbeault was quoted in the Toronto Star recently that he was very supportive of the new proposed global carbon tax on international shipping. But when he came to committee last week, he kind of pretended that he's never said those words before. So I'm curious, have you in your capacity been involved in any conversations with anybody within the government or the international community about this new global carbon tax on international shipping?
Thanks for your question. The Department of Transport manages our participation in negotiations at the IMO, the International Maritime Organization, and I think they would be better placed to answer that question. So I'm happy to follow up with more information on that.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Mr. Vancouver, on your point of order.
I'd like to provide Mr. Leslie the opportunity to correct the record on his misquote of the minister.
Okay, which aspect maybe? Or It's a point of debate, actually, but
Yes.
it's a point of debate.
But we can't be misquoting ministers in the meeting.
Well, it's not a good practice, and the people, there should be corrections made, but we'll have to wait till the Liberals turn to, I guess, correct the record. But it's noted that you feel the quote was not accurate.
Point of order. I'll point of order this one. I'd like to table a document from the Toronto Star that's titled Trudeau government backs talks for levy on shipping to help developing nations fight climate change. And in the byline, it says Environment Minister Guilbeault says the federal government is, quote, very supportive of talks to create a new levy on greenhouse gas emissions from maritime transportation. So if I could table that with unanimous consent, Mr. Chair?
Well, I don't know if this is, I know people do this, rise in the House and ask to table things, but in committee, is there such a procedure as tabling documents?
So he can send it to.
What you do is you can send it to the clerk, and the clerk can get it translated and distributed. Now, we're going to continue. You have 3 minutes left, Mr. Leslie.
Might I respond to that, Mr. Chair?
No, I'm afraid you can't, Mr. Van Koeverden. So we'll go to Mr. Leslie for 3 more minutes.
Ambassador, in your capacity, and I appreciate transport may be the lead through the International Maritime Organization, but have on the sidelines of perhaps the recent COP or any other conversations you've had, has this ever come up?
So reducing emissions.
Sorry, I have.
Point of order, Chair.
Okay.
Monsieur Leslie,
Mr. Leslie asked to table a document, I believe. In the committee, I said if you want to do that, you would have to send it in, because first of all, it needs to be in the 2 official languages, and if he wants to share this document with the committee members, he has to send it to the clerk. And has he done that through a point of order? He needs to translate it and then send it to all the members through the clerk. Well, through this point of order, tabling a document, I would also like us to table the analysis of 300 economists who said there's no better way of going through economic and energy transition than through carbon pricing. If you want to table that document, then we can distribute it.
Leslie.
I think I am over a target here that the current government doesn't really want to talk about, so I'll let the ambassador finish her response.
Yeah, and I would just say thank you for your question. I engage in conversations about reducing emissions in every sector because we're in a climate crisis and the world needs to do more across the board. So whether it's, oil and gas sector, agriculture sector, methane, shipping, aviation, the conversations are happening globally everywhere so that we can do more. And I know Megan Nichols around the table could speak a little bit more about the International Maritime Organization in particular.
Sure, go ahead, Ms. Nichols.
Sure, happy to do so. The International Maritime Organization has been working for a number of years now to identify potential pathways for the international shipping sector to reduce its emissions. It's one of the highest emitters on the transportation sector and very challenging to decarbonize. And one of the options that's being discussed at the IMO is a carbon levy, along with also the concept of a low-carbon fuel standard. So these are live discussions that are happening that Canada is participating in.
So obviously Canada is supportive if they are participating in it, and I guess the question is, has there been reflection on the economic impact on Canadians that are already struggling with that as part of these conversations?
All countries who are IMO members participate in the discussions, so regardless of their position on this particular concept or not. In terms of the economic impact, that is indeed part of the assessment of all of the different options that are on the table at the IMO, looking at the impact on states, including those that are more countries in the path of development.
Okay. Ambassador, the Liberals, as outlined by the Parliamentary Environment Commissioner, are failing to meet their emissions target. In fact, they have the worst record in the G7, despite us having a punishing carbon tax that is driving up the cost of everything and making us less competitive. So the U.S. is ranked above us, which doesn't have a carbon tax. In your conversations, how is it possible they have a better track record than Canada?
So thanks for your question. I think, we have very good relationships with G7 colleagues who want to hear about Canada's experience. And, they know that not everything's easy. It wouldn't be called ambitious if it was easy. So I think it's important to share our experience and learn from each other.
Thank you.
Certainly, Canada has a unique situation being who we are.
Thank you. We're going to go to